Did you know Patrick Mahomes and Baker Mayfield squared off against each other in college? The year was 2016, and the game they played that night is one of the most epic battles in college football history. This is QB Unfiltered Flashback. Before Mahomes and Mayfield became NFL stars and Patrick Mahomes won 3 Super Bowls with the Kansas City Chiefs, they played against each other in 2016 in the wild and woolly Big 12 Conference. Now, back then in 2016, the Big 12 was one of the craziest offensive conferences in college football. Numbers were put up routinely in games that were off the charts. This one blew all of those numbers right out of the water. The Big 12 Conference was a defensive coordinator's nightmare. And can you imagine lining up and playing against Mahomes and Mayfield and against Lincoln Riley and Eric Morris, 2 guys that played for Mike Leach, that knew what they were doing with the air raid, and they had 2 great quarterbacks to just basically go out there and put up comic book numbers. Sega football is what we used to call it, video game stats. The game was played on October 22nd, 2016 in Lubbock, Texas. Shout out to Buddy Holly. OU came into the game ranked 16th in the country and would go on to finish that season with an 11-2 record. Texas Tech struggled that year and finished with a 5-7 mark. And as you're going to see when we talk about this game and we watch these clips, I think one of the reasons that they went 5-7 is their defense was not good. So here we are. We've got this great game set up. And the Sooners come bebopping into Lubbock to play the Red Raiders. And after this epic 4-hour and 10-minute game, the final score showed on the scoreboard, Oklahoma 66, Texas Tech 59. But that's only half the story. The statistics that were put up that night are mind-boggling. There were 3 NCAA records set that night, including the most combined passing yards between 2 quarterbacks at 1,279. The most total yards gained by 2 opposing players, both quarterbacks, at 1,383 yards. And the most total offense by 1 player in a game, and that was set by the amazing Patrick Mahomes at an eye-popping 819 yards. The records tied were most combined first downs. Now, you've got some records that say it was 75. You've got other stats that say it was 78. Either way, that's a shitload of first downs. And the other record that was tied in this game was Mahomes tying the all-time passing record at 734 yards. And you're going to see that when we delve into this game that there are so many Mike Leach tie-ins to this. Well, the record that Mahomes tied, the 734 passing yards, he shares with quarterback Connor Halliday, who was a QB for the Washington State Cougars, and the head coach for Halliday's Cougars was Mike Leach. Here's a statistical oddity in this game. When the dust settled, both offenses had the same amount of yards at 854. That's pretty amazing. Also, defensive guys can probably plug their ears when I say this, but Texas Tech averaged on 109 snaps. Okay, they ran 109 plays. They averaged 7.8 yards a snap. But that pales a little bit in comparison to the Sooners' stat line on that. They ran 76 plays, and they averaged 11.2 yards every time they snapped the ball. So think about that now. Every time Oklahoma ran a play, they averaged a first down. Unbelievable. But the stat line of the night belonged to Patrick Mahomes. Throwing the rock, he was 52 for 88. You heard that right. He threw the ball 88 times for 734 yards and 5 touchdowns. And for good measure, Mahomes ran the rock for 85 yards. That's putting in some work. The 88 attempts were one shy of the NCAA record of 89 set by Connor Halliday. Connor Halliday threw the ball 89 times in 2013 against the Oregon Ducks. That was the game where Oregon's defensive coordinator, Nick Aliotti, had a complete meltdown after the game. He was incredulous and pissed that Mike Leach had the audacity to throw the rock 89 times against his defense in an attempt to win the game. Okay, so the problems faced by both teams' defensive coordinators were many. We'll start with the fact that both offenses ran the air raid offense. And that in itself is a nightmare for defensive coordinators. It's really, really hard to stop. And when you've got two quarterbacks with the ability of Mahomes and Mayfield, it's lights out. Both those C's were really, really good at what they did. They both played and coached the air raid, and they both had the connections to Mike Leach. The offensive skill players for both teams were off the charts. You know, you've got great quarterbacks, but you've also got to have a really good offensive line. And I'm going to show you some clips as we go, highlighting the protection, the schemes, the technique of the offensive lines, but the skill guys and the speed out there on the field. I mean, when you talk about Oklahoma's running back, Joe Mixon, that dude was a man playing with boys. And he wasn't even Oklahoma's best running back at the time. You know, their best guy was hurt that game. And when you watch Mixon play in these clips, just ask yourself, is this guy playing on a different planet than everybody else is? And then both QBs were at the top of their game. You know, they're collegiate top of their game, extremely talented, extreme confidence. And it's just very easy to see that not only were these guys slicing and dicing the defenses, but they were having fun doing it. It was easy. Now, we talk a little bit about Mahomes, and we talk a little bit about the record set in this game. Let's look at Oklahoma's offensive stats, which are mind-boggling. We'll start with the fact that on third down, they were 20 for 25. Now, the percentage of picking up first downs on third downs on 25 attempts and doing it 20 times, that's phenomenal. Most teams don't come close to having 25 third down conversion attempts. So Oklahoma, while they're scoring 66 points, had a lot of drives where they were going first down, second down, third down, first down, second down, third down, first down, so on and so forth, score. Now, Baker Mayfield, he threw for 545 yards on just 27 completions. That's 20 yards a completion. 20 yards a completion. But more amazing than that, that's 15 yards per attempt, which means whether the ball was complete or incomplete, whether he was sacked, whatever happened, when he dropped back to throw, every time that they attempted a pass, they averaged 15 yards per snap. That's amazing. Mayfield threw for 545, but Oklahoma ran for 309 yards. And that's the true beauty of the air raid that a lot of people don't talk about. And that's the ability for offenses to be able to run the ball out of that scheme. And the reason why you're able to do that is because when you can throw it effectively on the perimeter, defenses start to take guys out of the box to play coverage. And now you've got a light box, meaning a lot of 5-man boxes, and in some cases, a 4-man box. Well, if you've got a running back that has got some ability and you've got offensive linemen up front that can move people, get angles on blocks, you're going to have huge gash plays. And the Sooners did just that with 309 yards rushing. Joe Mixon, the running back I talked about earlier, ran for 263 yards. Okay, but a running back in an air raid, a really good air raid, the running back is a dual threat, which means he can run and catch. Okay. And Mixon had the 263 on the ground, but he also had 114 yards receiving. That's a weapon. Okay. So, Baker Mayfield's stats then at the end of the game, he was 27 out of 36 for 545 yards and 7 touchdown passes. That's a hell of a game. But when people look at this game, they don't talk about Mayfield's stats. They're talking about Mahomes and what he did, which was out of this world. Okay, so the anticipation for this game was huge because of the similarities between the two offenses, but also the storylines and the backstories that went into this game. And when you talk about all of these storylines, it all comes down and all comes back to one guy, and that's the Pirate, Mike Leach. So when we talk about Leach now, let's talk about his coaching tree and how this all ties into him at the end of the day. So Mike Leach began his head coaching career at Texas Tech in the year 2000. His starting quarterback that year, his first year as a head coach, was Cliff Kingsbury. Cliff Kingsbury is the head coach of Texas Tech for the 2016 shootout. Prior to coming to Texas Tech, Leach was the offensive coordinator at Oklahoma in 1999 for head coach Bob Stoops. Bob Stoops is still the head coach for the Oklahoma Sooners for the 2016 game. Okay, in 2009, Leach was suspended and subsequently fired by Texas Tech for the famous shed practice where he told receiver slash tight end slash receiver Adam James to take his attitude and his so-called concussion and go stand in a dark shed for the entire practice. Well, needless to say, that didn't go over well with Craig James and the James family. They raised a bunch of stink. James had a big platform on ESPN, and the geniuses at Texas Tech basically fired Mike Leach. Okay, that's a story for another day. Anyway, what I'm getting to on this, he was suspended then for their bowl game that year versus Michigan State. Now, they took Ruffin McNeil, who was the defensive coordinator, and they moved him to the head coaching position for that bowl game. And they took a offensive assistant by the name of Lincoln Riley, and they bumped him up to OC for that bowl game. Texas Tech went out and lit Michigan State up in that bowl. Lincoln Riley made his name that night, and that started his career, and he's never looked back. Lincoln Riley is the offensive coordinator for the Oklahoma Sooners in the 2016 game. Eric Morris was a starting receiver from Mike Leach at Texas Tech in 2007 and 2008. He was a slot receiver, caught like 74 balls both seasons, was a really, really good player. Played in the air raid, played for Leach, and now he is the offensive coordinator for Cliff Kingsbury and Texas Tech in the 2016 game. And now the two quarterbacks. You may or may not know this. I'm sure most of you do. But once upon a time, Baker Mayfield was a quarterback for Texas Tech. And he started for Texas Tech. And the head coach was Cliff Kingsbury, and some things went down there, and Mayfield transferred to Oklahoma. If he would have stayed in Lubbock, Texas, Mahomes then shows up. Those two guys would have been on the same team, in the same QB room, in the same locker room, competing for the starting job at Texas Tech instead of competing against each other on opposite sidelines in 2016. That's pretty amazing. Okay, so in 2017 now, the year after Bob Stoops is retired, Lincoln Riley is elevated to head coach. Baker Mayfield sticks around then for the 2017 season in Norman. He wins the Heisman Trophy that year. The backup quarterback in 2017 to Baker Mayfield at Oklahoma was some guy named Kyler Murray. You can't make this stuff up. The quarterback rooms that these two programs had during that time was really phenomenal. Let's look at a bunch of key plays in this game. And what this game really came down to was who was going to have the ball last. This was a tennis match, back and forth, and which defense was actually going to come up with a stop in the second half. And in fact, it's been widely reported that Baker Mayfield in the locker room at halftime told his offensive teammates, if you're afraid of scoring every drive in the second half, keep your ass in the locker room. Okay? And Oklahoma went out in the second half and scored on every drive except for the last one. And the last one they needed out to run the game out. Okay, let's start off now with this first drive of the game by Oklahoma. And if you're a defensive coordinator, what you don't want to do against a team that knows what they're doing throwing the ball and a quarterback that is really accurate throwing the rock, you don't want to get yourself in a cover zero look. And cover zero meaning that you're locking up in man-to-man. All four receivers are accounted for, plus the running back, so that eats up 5 defenders, and you've got no safety help over the top. Okay, and the problem that you have playing cover zero against somebody that knows what they're doing offensively is you're relying on the fact that those 5 cover guys aren't going to get beat on routes. And it doesn't matter what defense you're playing, what level you're playing. It's very rare when you have 5 cover guys that all have the same ability. And in this game, Texas Tech, of course, chooses to play Oklahoma in cover zero on this first drive. And they walk their free safety down, and he's responsible for the running back. Okay, now the running back for OU, Mixon, he can fly. He's a player. And defensive coordinators, when they line up and play cover zero, to make it so that the quarterback can't sit back there and pick them apart, they bring pressure. They blitz. Well, watch what the Red Raiders do on this snap. Okay, they're in a 6-man box, 4-man front, 2 backers in the box. Not only don't they bring 1 or 2 of those inside linebackers, they mush rush 2 of the defensive linemen. So in effect, they're playing cover zero with a 2-man rush. Now, when that kind of stuff happens, and this happened a lot during this game. This happened with both sidelines, both teams during this game offensively with both coordinators, Lincoln Riley and Eric Morris, and both quarterbacks, Mayfield and Mahomes, where they would line up and see what defense they were getting, and big smiles would come across their face. And it's like, it's just too easy in some of these situations. And when you run into a deal where you're getting a 2-man pass rush and you're playing cover zero behind it, that's pretty much suicide. Okay, so, you're lining up in zero. Lincoln Riley knows that your worst cover guy is going to be locked up on your running back. And so they run a hitch route with the outside receiver and free release the back, Mixon, to that side. And he just runs a vertical against the free safety, and he runs right by his ass. And that's easy pickings for Baker Mayfield. Okay, so we go to the second touchdown now by Oklahoma, and Texas Tech is still in man coverage. And they've got their corner who's backed off. He's playing loose. But OU's outside receiver absolutely blows his doors off with the vertical route. So again, you're putting your defensive guys in a situation where they can't run with the skill guys of Oklahoma. And Mayfield throws a great ball here. Okay, we talk about throwing threes, those outside verticals where you put air underneath it and just drop it in the bucket. And that's exactly what Baker Mayfield does on this. These first two drives for him and Lincoln Riley were like shooting fish in a barrel. Easy pickings. Okay, let's look at this play here and this real subtle. It's hard to catch it unless you point it out on film, but look what Mahomes does with this glance off and what it does to the slot defender or the flat defender for Oklahoma. So the left outside receiver is running what I call a drive route, where he's going to run like he's running a hitch route or a smash route. He's going to chop the feet down and sort of lull the defense to sleep for a second. And then he's going to come inside on like a little mini bender. And then they've got the flat route out here to affect the flat coverage. But watch what Mahomes does with his eyes. By glancing off that flat route, it causes that flat defender to go, whoa, and he puts on the jets and screams outside. Well, that opens up that big window and that big grass for that easy completion. Okay, Texas Tech taking advantage of Oklahoma's loose corner. What's the easiest thing to do? Snap the ball to Mahomes, let him GST, grab, stab, and throw, and just hand grenade the ball out there to a punch screen by the outside receiver. Make the cornerback miss. Okay, corners are scholarship to play coverage, not tackle. And so you're picking up easy yards out there. All right, let's take a look at this play here by Texas Tech. They line up in trips, and they're running an option route to the number 3 receiver. Now, the guy that makes this play go is the number 2 receiver. So he's going to take a mandatory outside release. And what that does to that flat defender is it widens him. He wants to get his hands on that route by number 2. And in chasing him outside, he's widening, and that's opening up all that grass to the outside for the number 3 receiver to run the what turns out to be a little out route. You know, we used to call this an option route because he had an option on how he's going to run his route, depending on how the defensive guy was playing him. But Texas Tech knows that release by number 2 is going to widen that hole out, and that the number 3 receiver is going to have all kinds of grass out there. Mahomes just gets the snap, gets his feet underneath him, waits for the guy to get into his break, puts it out there, easy pitch and catch. Okay, we talked about Texas Tech's pass protection earlier. Let's talk about technique here for a second. Now, Oklahoma's bringing a blitz on this. Now, this is not an exotic blitz, but they're bringing pressure. If you look at the technique that Texas Tech's O-line does on the snap of the ball, this is called a vertical set. So they're not going to pass block on the line of scrimmage. That's the last thing you want to do. It doesn't matter what type of offensive scheme you're running. When you pass block on the line of scrimmage, you're susceptible to twists, and you get guys that start to get picked off. And when you get a little bit of complicated blitzes by the defense, you get confusion by the offensive line. What the vertical set does, and they're backing straight up. We're talking, about 3 steps or so. By them backing up, they're letting the defense get into their rush lanes, show the blitz where it's coming from, and it makes it so much easier for the offensive line to sort out who's blocking who and to see where blitzes are coming from. It's very easy to see twists. And this is a great example of what a vertical set looks like. And look how easy this is for the Red Raiders to pick up. Now, the last drive of the half, okay, it's a shootout. It's a ping pong match. It's a tennis match. The last two drives of the half are really telling. You know, you've got Texas Tech, not a lot of time on the clock, and they zip it right down the field, you know, boom, 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 score. Now, in the old days of football, and this still happens, I think, in the Big Ten, you get these offensive coordinators and offenses then would come out like Oklahoma and do a couple of knee downs and take it off the field. And I'm like, what in the hell are we doing? That's not the way Lincoln Riley and Baker Mayfield think. So they get the ball back, and what do? They answer. Now, what this does, obviously, you're scoring points, but more important than that, you are sending a message to Texas Tech that, hey, you guys can score 1 billion points. We're going to score 1,000,000,001, and we're going to keep coming at you. And that's the way that both coordinators thought. That's the way both quarterbacks thought. And that's what makes football, offensive football, fun to watch when you got teams doing this type of stuff. This was a game that was a preview for what was going to happen in the NFL. You know, Mahomes went on after this 2016 season to be drafted with the number 10 pick in the first round by the Kansas City Chiefs, and the rest is history there. As I said earlier, Mayfield stayed the next year, won the Heisman Trophy for Oklahoma, and then was the first pick in the draft that year by the Cleveland Browns. But in 2016, that night in East Texas, these two quarterbacks put on a show that's one of the greatest battles in NCAA college football history. The stat line, ridiculous. If you watch that game in real time, man, that was a blast. I was one of those guys that watched it. If you didn't, there are plenty of replays of that game online. Google it, look it up, pour yourself a cold beverage and sit back and watch. That was fun football. Okay, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit that like button and subscribe. Drop me a comment down below. Let me know if you watched that game and your thoughts on it. Also, let me know who your favorite gunslinger is between those two quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes or Baker Mayfield. This has been QB Unfiltered Flashback. And remember, always throw the ball short to guys who can score. See ya.